Thank you so much for being here. I'm Stacy James with Just Spoolin Around, and we're going to make this cute baby heart-shaped pillow. This is an intermediate project that will be worked from the humps of the heart down to the point by working in the round. And that means it'll be worked in one piece, so we won't have to sew it together. Since we're starting at the humps, each hump will be worked separately through round 7. Round 5 differs from the right hump to the left, but all other rounds will be worked the same. In round 8, we'll connect the 2 humps to begin working the piece as one and finish up by knitting through round 16. Now, let's get into what you'll need to complete this project.
We'll be using 7-weight jumbo chenille in one color along with polyfill for the stuffing. I used lavender gray chenille, but as always, you use whatever color you'd like. You'll need about 23 yards or 21 meters of chenille and 3.1 ounces of polyfill. You'll also need a good pair of scissors. Finally, you'll need your preferred tools for completing the finishing work as well. The finishing work is pretty simple since we can just weave our tails into the work. Join and secure them with a simple knot or thread. Seal the ends using fray block or a lighter and shove them to the inside of the pillow. Recommended supplies are provided in the links below.
Gauge is irrelevant for this piece. However, the size of your stitches along with the amount of slack between your stitches will affect the final measurements. Since we'll be using polyfill to stuff the pillow, minimizing slack and stitch size will keep the stuffing from popping out through those stitches. I used 1 finger to size my stitches and very little slack. If you like my knit-alongs, don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring that notification bell to keep up on my latest publications. Also, if you share or sell your makes using any part of this pattern, please credit Just Spoolin Around in all digital and written advertising content and media. This includes Facebook groups, pages, and other social media outlets. Your support is key to my success of my small business, and I really hope that my free tutorials help with supporting yours as well. Now, when you're ready to get started, we'll meet back up in segment 2, where we'll begin by working the humps.
In this segment, we'll begin by unraveling our entire skein of yarn because we're going to use both the beginning and the tail end. One end will be for the right hump and the other one will be for the left hump as we work increases to form them. To begin, we're going to place our tail end to the left and come up about 4 inches to create our one and only chain about 2 fingers wide. Now when we look at the chain, we have a top leg here and we have a bottom leg here. We want to work 2 stitches in the top leg and 2 stitches in the bottom leg. So to do that, we're just going to place our working yarn behind the top leg to knit the first stitch, making sure that we put the stitch up on the top leg and we have our working yarn to the left. I'm using about 1 finger here, okay? Now, to create the second stitch in this top leg, we're going to bring the working yarn to the front to purl through the same top leg. So we push our yarn from front to back and draw up a loop so that we now have 2 stitches in the top leg. Here's 1, there's 2. Now we're going to rotate our work and we're going to work the bottom leg, which is now on the top. We're going to put 2 stitches here. Here is the tail end. We want to place our working yarn over the tail, but behind the bottom leg, and we're going to knit 1 again. And purl to make that second stitch. So to purl, we bring our yarn to the front and push it through to the back. Now we rotate our work to be at the top of our hump and we have 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I'm going to place a clip here that shows me this is my first stitch, but before I do, I'm going to go over round 2. So round 2, what we want to do is place 2 stitches in every stitch we just made, doubling our round count to 8. This first stitch we'll knit one and purl one like we did with the top and bottom legs. So we'll knit one, then wrap the yarn around to the front and push it through to the back to purl. Now, we're going to place our stitch marker here to know that this is the first stitch in the round. Now for this next stitch, we're going to purl one and knit one. So we'll keep our working yarn in the front, draw the next stitch right where the working yarn exits the last stitch we made, and we're going to push through the front and draw up a loop in the back, and that's your purl stitch. Now we want to knit through the same stitch, so we'll wrap our working yarn tightly around to the back, and then we're going to push a loop through the back to the front and draw up our knit stitch. Now we have 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the top. Now we're going to rotate and work the bottom part of the hump. Here we've got our tail end, and we want our working yarn to go over the tail but behind the first stitch on the bottom. So we're going to knit one, purl one to increase in this first stitch. So here we have our knit one, and to purl one, we wrap our working yarn tightly around to the front, push it through to the back, and draw up a loop. So we now have 2 stitches in one. Now we're going to keep our working yarn in the front because we're going to work a purl one, knit one to increase in this last stitch on the bottom. Let's draw this next stitch right where our working yarn exits the last stitch worked. Push it through and draw up a loop to work a purl stitch. Then wrap the working yarn around to the back tightly and draw up a loop to knit that second stitch. Now when I say we're wrapping the yarn around tightly, we're doing that because we want to minimize the slack here. This is going to be stuffed with polyfill, so we want to make sure the slack is nearly non-existent, okay? And our stitches are small for that reason as well. Now, we have a total of 8 stitches on round 2. All right, so now round 3, we're going to be working an increase again. So let's remove the stitch marker, and we'll knit one, purl one in this stitch. Here's our knit stitch. Now to purl in the same stitch, we wrap the yarn around tightly to the front and push it through the back to work that purl stitch. Then we'll place a stitch marker back on that first stitch of the round. Now we're going to knit the next 2 stitches, so 1 and 2. Then we're going to work another increase with purl one, knit one this time. So we'll bring our working yarn to the front to work a purl stitch first, then wrap our yarn around to the back to knit our increase stitch. Now we'll rotate the work, and we have the next 4 stitches on the bottom leg. In the first stitch, we're going to increase with a knit one, purl one. So we'll knit, then bring our working yarn forward, pushing that yarn through front to back, drawing up a loop for a purl stitch. Then we'll knit the next 2 stitches. 1, make sure your stitches are positioned in the right place here. There's 2. And now we're going to increase in the last stitch in this round with a purl, then a knit. So we're going to bring our yarn forward to work the purl stitch in this last stitch. Then we want to wrap it tightly around to the back to work our knit stitch in that same stitch. We now have 12 stitches on round 3. Now on round 4, we're just going to knit around. So we'll knit, then replace our stitch marker. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Round 4 is now complete. On round 5, we're going to work an increase on the first and last stitches in the round for a total of 14 stitches. So to begin, we'll knit one, purl one in this first stitch. Let's remove our stitch marker and work our knit stitch. To work the increase, we'll bring our working yarn tightly around to the front, push that yarn through the front to the back, and draw up a loop to purl. Now, replace the stitch marker on that first stitch. Next, we'll knit the next 10 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Here, we'll work our increase in the last stitch with a purl 1, knit 1. So we'll bring our working yarn forward to purl, then wrap our working yarn tightly around to the back, push it through to the front, and draw up a loop for the knit stitch. Now we're just going to knit around for the next 2 rounds. Remember, there are 14 stitches in the round, and you'll also need to move your stitch marker up on each round to mark that first stitch. Once you've completed row 7, we're going to put the right hump aside, and we're going to then start working the left hump. So I'll meet up with you to work our left hump as soon as you're ready. It's time to grab up the other tail end of your skein because we're going to start working on the left hump. So here we go. It's time to work the left hump of our heart. Rounds 1 through 4 will be worked exactly the same with the other end of our yarn. So with the tail end to the left, we'll come up about 4 inches to work our chain using 2 fingers to size it. Again, we want to work 2 stitches in the top leg and 2 stitches in the bottom leg. So here we go. We'll knit 1, making sure that we put the stitch up on the top leg and we have our working yarn to the left. Then bring the working yarn forward tightly, push it through to the back, and draw up a loop to purl the second stitch in the top leg. Now we're going to rotate our work, and we want to place our working yarn over the tail but behind the bottom leg. The bottom leg is now on the top, and we're going to work 2 stitches here. So let's knit 1, purl 1 again to make that second stitch. Now to purl, we bring our yarn to the front and push it through to the back. Then rotate our work to be at the top of our hump, and we have 4 stitches. On round 2, we'll work an increase in all 4 stitches, doubling our count to 8. This first stitch we'll knit 1 and purl 1 like we did with the top and bottom legs. So let's knit 1, then wrap the yarn around to the front and push it through to the back to purl 1. Now we're going to purl 1 and knit 1 in this next stitch on the top. So we'll keep our working yarn in the front, push it through the front and drawing up a loop in the back for our purl stitch. So we'll wrap our working yarn tightly around to the back, pushing it through the back and drawing up a loop for a knit stitch. Now we have 4 stitches on the top. Next, we'll rotate the work to work the bottom part of the hump, and we've got our tail end here, so we want to place it over. We want to place our working yarn over the tail but behind this first stitch on the bottom. So we're going to knit 1, purl 1 to increase in this first stitch. Here's our knit 1 to purl 1. We wrap our working yarn tightly around to the front, push it through to the back, and draw up a loop. So now we have 2 stitches in 1. We'll keep the working yarn in the front to first work a purl stitch. Now wrap the working yarn around to the back tightly and draw up a loop to knit that second stitch. We now have a total of 8 stitches on round 2. All right, now on round 3, we're going to be working an increase again, so we'll knit 1, purl 1 in this first stitch. Here's our knit stitch. Now we'll purl in the same stitch by wrapping the yarn around tightly to the front and then pushing it through to the back to work that purl stitch. Let's place our stitch marker on the first stitch of this round. Now we're going to knit the next 2 stitches. There's 1 and 2. Then we'll work another increase with a purl 1, knit 1 this time. So we'll bring our working yarn to the front to work a purl stitch first, then wrap our yarn around to the back to knit our increase stitch. Then let's rotate the work to work the next 4 stitches on the bottom, and again we're going to increase in this first stitch on the bottom, again with a knit 1, purl 1. So first we'll knit, then bring our yarn forward, pushing that yarn through front to back, drawing up a loop for a purl stitch. Then we'll knit the next 2 stitches. 1 and 2. Now we're going to work an increase in our last stitch on the round by working a purl stitch and then a knit stitch. So we'll bring our yarn forward to work the purl stitch, wrap it tightly around to the back to work our knit stitch in that same stitch. We now have 12 stitches on round 3. Round 4 is the easy round because we're just going to knit around. So we'll knit 1 and then replace our stitch marker. This little guy's hiding out back here. Okay, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Now, remember, round 5 is going to be different on the left leg from what we did on the right, or on the left hump from what we did on the right hump. So our increases will be worked along the left edge rather than the right edge. So we'll knit these first 5 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we'll increase on this last stitch on the top with a purl 1, knit 1. So let's purl first, wrap the working yarn tightly around to the back to knit in the same stitch. Next we'll rotate to work an increase on the first stitch of the bottom. So we'll knit 1, then wrap the yarn around to the front and purl in the same stitch. Now we're going to knit the last 5 stitches for a total of 14 stitches on round 5. Now the next 2 rounds, we're just going to knit. So remember, there will be 14 stitches on each of round 6 and round 7. Once you finish round 7 on the left hump, I'll meet back up with you to join these 2 humps. See you soon. On round 8, we are going to join our 2 humps. So with both humps facing the same way, that is with the first stitch on each hump to the right and on the top, of course, we'll begin with the right hump by knitting the 7 stitches on the top. So there's 1, 2, I'm going to fold it over to make it a little easier here. It's 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now we're going to knit the first stitch on the left hump to join the 2. It's as simple as that. So we'll remove the stitch marker and knit that first stitch. Here are the 2 joining stitches, and we want to pin them together with our stitch marker to keep them from unraveling as we work. So if you don't have a clamp, that's fine. You can use a string or anything just to tie them together and keep them together. Okay, now we'll knit the rest of our stitches on this left hump on the top and on the bottom. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Now here's the first stitch on the bottom of the right hump. So we'll knit that stitch to join the back sides together. And again, we want to pin these 2 joining stitches together. So we'll grab another stitch marker and then just knit these last 6 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 for a total of 28 stitches. Now let's rotate so our first stitch is to the right. Here we can see the hole as a result of knitting the 2 humps together. So let's turn our work upside down so we can sew that hole closed. Using the cut tail end from the left hump, we're going to work the yarn through the 4 corners or joining stitches. And the tail is coming from the stitch on the upper left, so let's find the stitch on the lower left and thread our tail through it, cinching as we go. Then find the lower right stitch and thread the tail through that. Next, we want to locate the upper right stitch and feed our tail through that, coming full circle to the upper left. So feed that tail through that. This has sewn the hole closed, but we want to continue to secure this tail end. So we'll thread it through the stitch on the lower left once again, and then reverse and come back around clockwise for one more full circle. So you want to come back to the upper left, then to the upper right, down again to the lower right, and finally then the lower left. Okay, now let's finish up our ends. We'll go ahead and cut and seal this tail end using a lighter or fray block or not, whatever you prefer. Now, with the beginning tail end on one of our humps, let's weave the tail end in just a couple of stitches. Then we'll cut and seal it, and we're going to do the same for the tail on the other hump. When finished, I'll meet back up with you in the next segment. In segment 3, we're going to begin working decreases to shape the point section of the heart, so no more increasing hereafter. Let's get started. We've completed the shaping of our humps using increases, and now we're going to start decreasing to shape the point of the heart. So to get started on round 9, we're going to work a left leaning decrease. To do that, cross the first stitch over the second. Then draw the stitches right where the working yarn exits the last stitch we made and knit through both stitches. This reduces 2 stitches into 1. Really tighten this stitch up to keep it small and minimize the slack between those 2 stitches. Now let's knit the next 4 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here are our 2 joining stitches. Let me just place this stitch marker back on the first stitch, and we're going to work a second left leaning decrease. So cross that first stitch over the second and knit through both stitches, tightening up that stitch. Again, let's knit the next 4 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this time we're going to work a right leaning decrease. To do that, we cross this second stitch over the first stitch to the right and knit through both stitches, making sure to minimize that slack. Then tighten up that stitch. Now let's rotate the work and work a left leaning decrease by crossing the first stitch over the second and knitting them together while minimizing slack and making sure the stitch is uniform. Knit the next 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, we're at our joining stitches on this back side, and we want to work a right leaning decrease here. So we'll cross the second stitch over the first and knit them together. Again, we'll knit the next 4 stitches. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we'll work another right leaning decrease to finish up the round. So cross that second stitch over the first and knit them together. We now have 22 stitches on round 9. We can see the heart is beginning to close up inwards, which is exactly what we want to happen. So let's rotate our work to begin round 10. Round 10 is another decrease round, but we won't be decreasing along the edges, just the center. So let's knit the first 4 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oops, let's place our stitch marker back on that first stitch. Now we're going to knit these 3 stitches together with a left leaning decrease. So the first stitch crosses over the second stitch, which then crosses over the third. We now have 3 stitches we need to knit through at once. Ooh, that's a bit tight for me. If your stitches are too small to work through, when letting the stitches go, you can see that the third stitch gets worked through first on a left leaning decrease, then the second, then the first. So let's grab that third stitch and knit through it, making the loop larger. Now drop the working yarn and pass the second stitch over the larger knit stitch. Then do the same with the first stitch and give it a little tug to the left. All 3 stitches are now knitted together into just one. Now we just need to tighten up that stitch. Now we'll knit the next 4 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have just decreased our stitch count by 2 on the top side. Now we'll go ahead and rotate the work to begin on the back side. Knit the next 4 stitches. It's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now again, we're going to knit these next 3 stitches together, only this time by working a right leaning decrease. So the 3rd stitch crosses over the 2nd, which then crosses over the 1st. I need to work my stitches one at a time, so we can see that this 1st stitch gets worked first, then the 2nd, then the 3rd. So we'll knit that 1st stitch, making the loop a bit larger, then drop that working yarn and pass the 2nd stitch over the knit stitch, and now pass the 3rd stitch over the knit stitch, giving the stitch a little tug to the right and tighten it up. We've just decreased our stitch count by 2 more on this round. Now we'll knit these last 4 stitches, making sure we minimize that slack, and that completes round 10 for a total of 18 stitches in the round. We'll rotate the work so the top is facing up. For round 11, we're just going to knit around for 18 stitches. So here's 1, and we'll place our stitch marker back on that 1st stitch of the round. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we turn it over to work the other 9 stitches on the other side. Here's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. For round 12 and the remaining decreasing rounds, we'll be decreasing along the edges only. So we'll begin by working a 3-stitch left leaning decrease. So the 1st stitch goes over the 2nd, goes over the 3rd. Again, I'm going to work mine individually, so I'll knit the 3rd stitch first. I'll drop the working yarn, then pass the 2nd stitch over the knit stitch, then pass the 1st stitch over the knit stitch, giving it a tug to the left, and we'll tighten up the stitch. Next, we'll knit the next 3 stitches. So there's 1, 2, and 3. Now we'll knit the last 3 stitches together on this side by working a right leaning decrease. So the 3rd stitch goes over the 2nd, goes over the 1st. So working them individually, you knit the 1st stitch, and we'll drop the working yarn, pass that 2nd stitch over the knit stitch, then pass the 3rd stitch over the knit stitch, giving it a tug to the right and tightening up that stitch. Now we'll turn the work. We're going to do the same exact thing on the back side. So let's work our 3-stitch left leaning decrease. In the video, I'm mistakenly working a right leaning decrease, so don't do as I do, rather what I say. Okay, so we're going to work the 3rd stitch first, drop the working yarn, pass the 2nd stitch over the knit stitch, then pass the 1st stitch over the knit stitch, and give it a tug to the left, then tighten up that stitch. Now we'll knit the next 3 stitches. There's 1, 2, and 3. Now we'll finish the round with a 3-stitch right leaning decrease. I'm going to work the 1st stitch, so we'll drop the working yarn to pass the 2nd stitch over the knit stitch, and then pass that 3rd stitch over the knit stitch. Now give it a little tug to the right and tighten up the stitch. We now have 10 stitches on round 12. For round 13, we'll knit around for 10 stitches. Then we're going to start stuffing the heart with our polyfill. Go ahead and stuff it as much as you'd like. These humps actually take up a lot more stuffing than you'd think. When you finish, I'll meet back up with you to work round 14. We'll be decreasing again on round 14, only with a regular 2-stitch decrease. So we'll start with the left leaning decrease. Now that our heart is stuffed with polyfill, we have to really make sure we pull these stitches together to minimize the slack. Okay, we're going to cross that first stitch over the second and knit them together. Then knit the next stitch. Now we'll work a right leaning decrease by crossing the second stitch over the first stitch and knitting them together for a total of 3 stitches on this top side. Make any necessary adjustments in your slack to make sure there's very little space between those stitches. This is going to be a nice, short, plump little heart. All right. Let's rotate the work and do the same thing on the back side. Let's work a left leaning decrease by crossing the first stitch over the second and knitting them together. Then knit the next stitch. Next, we'll work a right leaning decrease by crossing the second stitch over the first and knitting them together. Again, make any necessary adjustments to your slack between those stitches. We now have 6 stitches on round 14. For round 15, we're going to knit around for 6 stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now we're going to stuff it with any remaining polyfill before we close it up. Okay. So for round 16, we're left with just 3 stitches on each the front and back sides of our heart. So we're going to go back to our 3-stitch decreases to close this up. With our first stitch to the right, let's knit these last 3 stitches together to the left. We'll knit the 3rd stitch first, drop the working yarn, pass the 2nd stitch over the knit stitch, then pass the first stitch over the knit stitch. Then give the stitch a little tug to the left and tighten it up. We now have only 1 stitch on the front. Rotate the work, and this time we'll knit these 3 stitches together to the right. So we'll knit the first stitch first, drop the working yarn, pass the 2nd stitch over the knit stitch, then pass the 3rd stitch over the knit stitch. Now give it a tug to the right and tighten the stitch. We now have just 2 stitches on round 16. Now let's rotate the work so the first stitch in the round is facing us. Now with the back sides of our 2 stitches together, knit them together. Then let's cut a 4-inch tail, draw it through both stitches, then from back to front, draw the tail end once more through both stitches. Now, we just need to weave the tail end through a single existing stitch, secure it with either a knot or upholstery thread, cut a bit off the tail, seal the end, and shove it inside the pillow. I poke my fingers through the stitches near the bottom to move some of this stuffing into the points and just to do some final shaping touch-ups with the polyfill. And that's it.
You have just completed this sweet little baby heart pillow, which is identical on the front and the back. I hope I made this as easy as possible and that you enjoyed the process. If you have any questions or need any help, please don't hesitate to comment below or email me at support@justspoolingaround.com. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring that notification bell if you like my knit-alongs. Thanks again for watching. Peace out, all you hand knitting lovies. Until next time.